that within South Africa, but indeed we're always conscious of the fact that this was not a South African lecture, but an African lecture. And indeed I must also say that our friends across the continent have raised that thing with us for many times, to say we must not deliver this lecture only from South Africa, but also from other countries on our continent. And Your Excellency Minister, indeed, we are very, very glad indeed that we could come to Guinea as the first country after all of these other 12 years in South Africa. And indeed, you are quite right, Minister, that this was not an accident, because Guinea is a particular place. Guinea is a particular place in the struggle for our own liberation. It's a unique place, and indeed we were privileged ourselves, a privilege to come here for the purpose of this lecture. And I must say, not to take too much time, Your Excellency, because there are many other people around the world who are listening. I'm sure they are very impatient to hear our lecturer, our esteemed lecturer. Very, very glad indeed that we have as our lecturer today, our esteemed lecturer, the Africa Day lecture, Professor Mbeki, who is with us here, born in Guinea, and an outstanding African scholar who is teaching international relations theory in African political thought at Cornell University in the United States. Your Excellency Minister, whenever we've asked people to deliver this lecture, it's also always on the basis of our respect for their intellect, our respect for their commitment to Pan-Africanism, our respect for their commitment to honesty. And so that's been our assessment of Professor Mbeki, that here we would have an outstanding African lecturer, an esteemed lecturer, who would say something valuable not only to us in this hall, but throughout our continent and the African diaspora, say something very significant about the state of the continent and what we need to do essentially to achieve the renaissance of the continent. To give an indication, Your Excellency Minister, about the thinking of our esteemed lecturer, Professor Mbeki, I want to quote, I hope it won't be too long, a response he got to a question that was posed to him in 2021. And the question was, how has the way you understand the world changed over time? And what or who promoted the most significant shifts in your thinking? And this was part of his response, Your Excellency. He said the war in Iraq shattered a window of opportunity after the collapse of the Cold War. The idea that we could return to the basis upon which the new world under the UN Charter was founded, multilateralism, mutual coexistence, mutual respect, rule of law, everybody abiding by international law, etc. The Iraq War, for me, closed that window. And what was frightening was that in official Europe, there was actually no situation, no sanction at any level, nor any unambiguous condemnation afterwards by any incorporated European body. And they say all of those things have echoes. If African people can permit themselves to say, quote, we don't care about the International Criminal Court, unquote, it's partly because of Iraq. The lack of consequences for it led many to the conclusion that there was no universal justice, universal humanitarian morality, universal jurisdiction. European doublespeak around the world also said this a lot about European self-doubts about United States unilateralism. It has also caused many to rethink whatever expectations they had about the emergent role of Europe in the post-Cold War era. The debates about the fallout of the Iraq War were as much about Europe as they were about the US, because people had hoped that Europe could rally around traditions such as the Geneva Conventions, the norms against aggression, and so on. He said at some point Bush went to war against the public sentiment of America because the majority were opposed to it. But still, he had those core groups in the public that were for it and thought they could afford immunities and the right to re-election. He's saying, Your Excellency, that we need to define for ourselves, to think for ourselves. And he's giving an assessment here of the war of Iraq, what happened there, and what it means for us as Africans. And not to be deluded by the mere use of words about multilateralism, mutual coexistence, mutual respect, rule of law, when people are actually the people who pronounce